Welcome to Solved, because if we don't tell you how to think, someone dumber on the internet will. My name is Jay, and our other resident solvers are Amanda, Deon, and Erin, who will offer a greeting now.
Hey there.
Hello.
How's it going?
Collectively, we produce the venerable, indispensable, not to mention award-winning podcast Best of the Left, where humans, that's us, curate progressive media on a chosen topic, creating episodes that are greater than the sum of their parts. On this show, we use those same curation skills to pull together stories and ideas that help us solve some of society's biggest problems. Today, we're going to be talking about identifying our enemies. And if you don't have an enemy, it's time to make some. Because it turns out this is an absolutely critical key to getting anything worthwhile done. So if you don't know who your enemy is, stay tuned to find out. First, though, when it comes to protesting, there's a lot of protesting happening these days. We're all in favor of that. So protests against encroaching fascism, authoritarianism, whatever you want to call it. I've seen like two primary arguments popping up, and I didn't love either of them. The first was when the military gets sent in, don't show up. That's the strategic argument that one writer was presenting. It was like, how embarrassing would it be for Trump and the military if they show up to a city and the streets are empty? Haha, got him, right? And then the other is a sort of reflexive defense of literally anything a protester does. It's that idea. It's like, well, if we're protesting fascism and a protester does it, then it is in opposition to fascism and therefore good. And I don't think that either of those takes is quite right. And this one, I think, is better. So from In These Times, they wrote the article, Trump's Manufactured Crisis and the Urgency of Strategic Nonviolence. So this is not our primary conversation today, but we wanted to get it in at the top here. So the article begins, quote, following the example of other authoritarians, Donald Trump wants us to burn cars. He wants us to throw rocks. He wants images of chaos, especially violence against police or National Guard troops, to flood the evening news. These are precisely the results he wants, to manufacture chaos as a means of justifying repression and extending his authoritarian raids on our communities. We must not fall into his trap, end quote. Not showing up is one way of not falling into that trap, but it's not what we need right now. We need for there to be actual resistance. So the article goes on, quote, the way we avoid this trap is not by staying home. It's by creating the largest possible mobilization of resistance with the broadest possible participation. The challenge for movements now is not just to oppose Trump's naked power grab, but to refuse to play the role he's cast us in. Continuing, quote, when street battles with riot police escalate, the state seizes its opportunity. It invokes law and order, justifies repression, and tries to fracture the movement by presenting it as a threat to public safety. But there's a flip side. When repression is seen as disproportionate or unconstitutional, like calling in troops in clear violation of public and political will, or when those troops attack nonviolent protesters, it can spark a powerful backlash, end quote. So now we're talking about theory of change. We're not talking about what's morally justifiable for a protester to do, or what's, philosophically justifiable, or debates about what really constitutes violence. It's about the actual impacts of your actions and the collective actions of protesters in the real world as people not taking part watch it play out and react to it. So showing up is important to resist authoritarianism, but what actions we take really, really matters. Creating the visual divide between a totally unnecessary military threatening, overwhelming force and a staunchly peaceful protest is what actually pulls more and more people to our side. And finally, to wrap up my introduction, it says, quote, this backlash can polarize wide swaths of the public in favor of movements that are resisting. It can compel even moderate politicians to align with people in the streets. And it can mobilize broad swaths of civil society to join in protest. Churches, unions, immigrant rights groups, community organizations, end quote. So what I'm arguing is to keep these principles in mind when you go protesting or during discussions about protesting, like you may hear people arguing any of those things I mentioned before. Like the best thing to do is to not show up, or reflexively defending destruction of property as like, well, that's not real violence, but that doesn't really matter. And it is the perception that matters. That is what protests are for. It is about creating the perception of resistance and the perception of what that resistance looks like. And it needs to look like something people want to be part of, right? That's how you get more people in, even the moderates who like will take any opportunity to tisk the protest movement, and in doing so give basically a pass to fascism. So anything we can do to have that not be the case is the better theory of change that we should be following. Any thoughts on this?
Well, we had a little discussion prior to hitting record, and I'd love for us to have a longer time to discuss this because I think it is important, but also interesting that we have to rewrite some of these rules. Like, yes, we can look to the past for a lot of lessons and a lot of ways to go about our strategy, but we're living in a time with I mean, well, what's the one thing we know about Trump? He knows how to manipulate the media. I mean, now we're learning he's pretty good at manipulating social media as well because he's got this network of sycophants and little minions doing his work for him. And now there's AI. And so even if there isn't a car burning, they can make it look like there is one, right? So, like, there is manufacturing crisis, as they say in this article, is what he does, and it's what he's good at. And I just think that that's the new element here. That it's one thing if you were dealing with kind of the status quo of the last 50, 60, 70 years, where even though there's wheeling and dealing and trying to create a certain public perception, there were not the same tools in place. And those tools are here now in a very, very scary way. They can totally alter our perception of reality. And so in that case, we have to adapt to that and adjust to that in some way. And there's never going to be a perfect way to do it. I agree, but I think that when we look at uprisings in other countries, they look a lot messier, but I think that there's more history in those countries of uprisings and that there's not as much shock. Whereas here, even though we've totally had like centuries of violence, we like to think as Americans that like we're pretty civil because we've had the same basic government structure for the last 250 years. And so the public is still in this sense of if anyone steps out of line, quote unquote, then I reject that because that's not how we do it, right? That's not what we do here. There's going to be an election in 4 years and things are going to change. So why go so crazy over, the current presidential administration? And so that mentality means that we are constrained and we always have been. So, like, when there is any violence, whether it be the labor movement, whether it be the civil rights movement, like anything of suffragettes back in the day, like that is seen as almost immoral. Like, how could you? You've broken something about our country, which is laughable. It's totally laughable. But as Jay was saying, it doesn't really matter whether it's laughable or not. That's how people perceive these things. And so, what can we do differently to make sure that we are making progress, to make sure that we have a real goal, which is something we were talking about before we got on the call, that is lacking from these current movements? And then how do we control the narrative? How do we make sure we control the narrative and don't play into his hands? And that part is the part that we're all going to have very nuanced, I think, feelings about. And some could rightly argue, like, it doesn't matter, they're gonna paint us as violent, crazy people anyway, so who cares, right? Like, that's a valid argument to make, but we are in the midst of it. Like, we're still in the thick of figuring out what this looks like and what is the best approach with the current situation we have.
I definitely don't disagree with the theory of change that we're discussing. I think building up an infrastructure, especially with the organizations that are putting together protests and rallies, makes a lot of sense for them to then offer trainings to prepare people for when they encounter state sanctioned violence. I do kind of agree, like the last thing that Amanda said, where it's really hard to have a perfect movement. And we've had very peaceful protests that, like, by and large, I think Americans just don't have a taste for it. Like,
Mhm.
we see protests and there is a gut reaction to it, no matter what it looks like. I mean, whether it's
Right.
sit-ins, whether it's nonviolent.
Kneeling for God's sakes.
Now, do I think, like, morally, I don't want people to be hurt either way? Like, I don't want someone to accidentally get hurt. I don't want there to be kerfuffles. Uh, but I do understand that as much as we should build the infrastructure and account for it and send messaging about peaceful protests, it is really hard to control them, especially when they're spontaneous like they were in LA. Now, it's completely different for the No Kings or the hands off
Mhm.
protests, but the spontaneity in itself, like there are going to be people who aren't necessarily protesting. They're just coming out to the streets, just seeing like what's going on. There's going to be so many other groups there too that are in support that don't necessarily have the messaging for the organizations or who haven't been privy to the trainings of how to protest peacefully and make sure people stay safe. So we're definitely fighting a huge battle. But as far as change, I do agree that making sure that we try to stick with, I guess, our morals as we try to, lead forward.
Or the public's perceived morals, maybe.
Yeah, because back to what Jay said, we can debate violence all day long.
And I think the point of us saying this to an audience that is by definition more plugged in is to give a new framing that so you can say to someone who is considering violence or act like at a protest and they're starting to act in a violent way, and you could rein them in not by saying that's wrong and immoral, but by saying that's not the most effective thing you can do. That's anti-helpful to our cause, and here's why. Because when someone has the instinct to use violence to resist fascism, it's not like the craziest
No.
instinct in the world.
Right.
And if you tell them they're wrong and bad, then they're going to tell you to fuck off. And so this is a better thing to tell them. It is about the theory of change going forward.
Long term, we do have a perception war that has to be fought because the perception of violence as a burning Waymo vehicle is equal to police beating people without weapons.
Right.
And at some point, we have to start fighting the perception war long term and making people see that the guys dressed up in military gear are not the same as people who are just rightfully angry at the people dressed up in military gear. So short-term violence, it is strategically wrong, and it will be used almost exclusively against left-wing protests. But long-term, we do have to also work the refs, so to speak, to get people to see that these things are not equal.
Deon, do you think that maybe using some messaging that frames wealthy corporations as our enemy might be helpful towards the reframing of violence?
I think that would be extremely helpful.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, next up, our primary discussion of the day is about the struggle to implement progressive policies, including identifying the enemies we need to make. So the article, A Song of Full Self-Driving, Elon isn't Tony Stark, he's Michael Scott. And when I read this, I thought, that's great. I'd love to talk about that. I wonder in what context I could justify bringing it up. And so I was pretty excited to have had the idea of why it makes sense for today's conversation. But for context, I was never a Elon Musk sycophant of any sort, even back when he wasn't obviously evil. I just thought maybe he's doing some okay things and cool, whatever. But the full self-driving thing, I don't know if I knew that it went back to at least 2015. So this writer pulls together a series of quotes, December 2015 from Elon Musk. We're going to end up with complete autonomy, and I think we will have complete autonomy in approximately 2 years. January 2016, in 2 years, someone should work anywhere connected by land and not blocked by borders, e.g., you're in LA and the car is in New York. June 2016, I really would consider autonomous driving to be basically a solved problem. Wow, that was 9 full years ago, or 10 maybe.
Just can I put it real quick?
Yeah.
What problem were we trying to solve exactly?
We do not ask those
I
questions,
know,
Amanda,
I know.
about the advancement of technology, and you
God.
should know that. October 2016, he says, by the end of 2017, Tesla will demonstrate a fully autonomous drive. March 2018, I think probably by the end of next year. February 2019, I think we will be feature complete, full self-driving this year in 2019, he said. And then there were a bunch more, and the article writer didn't even bother to include them. So the writer says, quote, every year, Musk says full self-driving is months or weeks away. Every year, it slips over the horizon. And every year, the media and the stock market pretend that Musk hasn't failed, end quote. And that is the crux of it. That's why we're having this conversation. And so it reminded me, like last week in the members only section, I ended up talking about how international relations between countries is all based on bullshit. And the reason it works is because it's sort of mutually beneficial for everyone to collectively decide to believe in bullshit rather than face harsh realities. So we run on bullshit. And the stock market does that too. So, like, turns out Musk is a much more successful bullshitter than he is a leader of companies by a long shot. It's just that the rest of us didn't realize that being a bullshitter is the best skill a person can have to run a company. He doesn't have to really know what he's doing very much. This article goes into like a lot of technical details about how Musk personally, specifically took the wrong path and overrode his engineers who were aghast. Like, why would you do that? We'll never be able to do what we're trying to do if you make us do it the dumb way. And Elon Musk was like, no, I truly believe we need to do the dumbest thing possible. And so that's how Tesla ended up years behind other autonomous driving companies. But at the same time, he was like a loud buffoon on Twitter who kept convincing people that he wasn't full of shit, or like, hey, just stick it out a little longer, just keep our stock price up a little longer and we'll get there. And it turns out that's actually what was needed in his companies. Like, that's what his role is. The technology that he vetoed is called LiDAR. It uses lasers to help the cars understand their surroundings, like where they are and what's around them. Elon didn't like LiDAR. And so the article says, quote, Elon Musk is less like Tony Stark and more like Michael Scott. And then quoting Elon Musk, it says, people don't shoot lasers out of their eyes to drive, Musk said recently as an explanation for why Teslas didn't need LiDAR. You tell me, is that the Avengers or The Office? Anyone want to dunk on Musk?
I mean, yeah, he sounds like all the elected officials saying Iran's going to have a nuclear weapon in like just a few weeks, just a few days, just a few months. Like, we better do something. It's like this bizarre, it's a PR campaign, which is what that is as well. And the fact that he's been able to get away with it for this long is pretty shocking, except when you look at the fact that elected leaders have been able to get away with saying Iran's on the verge of a nuclear weapon for as long as they have. So, it's effective, apparently.
In defense of Michael Scott, Elon Musk is Ricky Gervais Michael Scott and not the Steve Carell Michael Scott, because Steve Carell Michael Scott actually cared about the people around him.
Right.
He's just a bumbling idiot, but he does love the people around him. Elon Musk doesn't love anyone around him. He is selfish. He is a liar. He is manipulative. And that is his, I guess those are his skills that have gotten him to where he is. This idea that the media has never challenged, this idea that we've got self-driving cars, just this one specific thing, I think is emblematic of the broader problem with having billionaires in the first place. Because he has all this money, he has power. He cannot be challenged because then you might lose access to him. And if you lose access to him, you might lose jobs in the future. There's so much riding on just asking him, hey, Elon, you've been saying this for 10 years. When is it going to happen? That question could banish you. You could lose your job over it. And that's one of many reasons why billionaires in general should not exist, because no one person should have that much power that they cannot even be asked, hey, why are you lying? Because we all can see it. We all know he's lying. Once you see it put together like this, it's clear that he's been lying this whole time. But the people that are near him that could ask him never will and never have. And that's a function of this one person having all of this money. And like Jay was pointing out, this one person decided, I don't like this better idea, this better path forward, because number one, he's stupid. But number two, there's the secondary reason that he wanted to use cameras instead of lasers because he wants to record all the data that he possibly could,
Mm-hmm.
which is another problem with all these people, is they want to record everything about us all the time. And when you let a bumbling, narcissistic, selfish a-hole have all this information about us, could it possibly go well? No,
Yeah.
of course not. So one person should never have this much power in any scenario, especially a guy like Elon Musk.
Yeah, I saw that theory posited in the article that he wanted to use cameras only instead of lasers because he wants the data from the cameras, but it's not an either or choice. The other companies went with a hybrid solution. They use cameras too. You know, it's not like, well, which is better? The answer is you need all the information you can possibly get to drive a car with a computer brain so that it knows where it is, what's around it, what it's doing, so that it can avoid running into stuff. And it talks about how original Teslas had radar on it, not LiDAR, but radar. And and eventually he didn't just decide that they would stop putting radar on Teslas. He decided that the radar that already existed on existing Teslas would be deactivated. And those cars were still allowed to do the like semi-autonomous self-driving, and crashes and mistakes ticked up. Like they could see it in the data. They changed the data inputs and got worse results. And they're like, yep, cool. We're just going to keep on going in this direction and that'll be fine. And that's what the engineers were horrified by. And Elon was like, full speed ahead, cameras only.
If you're arguing that he's dumb and evil, I'm not gonna stop you.
Okay. You prefer a hybrid solution to understanding. Okay. So this all begs the question, what does any of this have to do with the struggle to implement progressive policies? Well, keep in mind how Elon Musk has been treated by broader society when he lies for a decade or more. As we come to this article from Current Affairs, they always call you unrealistic. Quote, when bold egalitarian policies are proposed, they are inevitably branded impossible, even if they're feasible. See the case of mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani, who just won his primary election the night before we're recording this. And, the article goes on to quote a naysayer in The Atlantic at some length. Longtime listeners may recall that we have a sort of morbid curiosity regarding The Atlantic. And we once enjoyed an article calling The Atlantic the worst magazine in the country. And this article that we're talking about today is written by the same dude, Nathan J. Robinson. So the naysaying in The Atlantic says of Mamdani, quote, he is a leftist in the Bernie Sanders mold with a raft of great sounding policies, free buses, free childcare, cheap groceries, frozen rents, but a lot of these are impractical at best. Free buses would deprive the MTA of needed revenue. Free childcare would require a mammoth tax hike that Albany would need to approve, which it has shown no interest in doing, et cetera, et cetera. And they go on explaining all the reasons why this couldn't possibly happen. And just like focusing on the childcare idea for a moment, the article writer responds, quote, how much would it cost to provide free citywide childcare? Lowry, the Atlantic writer, dismisses it out of hand by saying that the tax hike required would be mammoth and the state government would never approve it. She doesn't mention that New Yorkers United for Childcare has put out a 79-page plan for how universal childcare for New York could work and be funded, including explaining why it's necessary, end quote. So, like, that is the role of the doubter, to just say flatly, well, it can't be done. Look at the problems with it. Let's go ahead and assume that those problems can't be overcome. And Nathan Robinson points out, like, she doesn't mention that there's a 79-page explanation that answers her exact accusation. She may not even know it exists. She just assumes that it can't be done. And Robinson points out in this piece that, like, that's kind of all you need if you're writing a piece in The Atlantic. Like, if you're going to criticize the left, You don't have to back it up with facts. You
Yeah.
just have to assume that the left is wrong and then say that and then wrap up your piece. Like that's your whole job. Yeah, comparing that kind of treatment with the treatment that people like Elon Musk get in the other marketplace of ideas in the business world instead of the political world. If you're helping people, then that's ridiculous. That can't be done. Don't bother even thinking about it. But if you've failed promises for a decade, then he's still probably the genius of our time. Just give him as much time and money as he needs, and he'll figure it out.
So is this where I plug? Go ahead and smash that subscribe button. Visit our Patreon, because I think we're making a very solid case about the importance of independent media. Because, yeah, the Atlantic not backing it up, like that's so textbook. It's lazy journalism that at this point, I think we all come to expect it from the Atlantic, and that's sad. It's a pretty big publication, so there should be some standard, and I don't know them, but I am sure they have readers out there who treat it like a Bible, and just anything it says, that must be backed up, fact checked, good to go. And I think we're showing that's not true. Like there is a plan. I think about Bernie Sanders and how
Yes.
Medicare for all was treated. And I mean, like, that was the whole thing. It's all, how are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? And I know this has been said so many times in the media, and it's always, how are you going to pay for things that, I don't know, create some kind of social
Yeah.
safety net that are actually for people, versus, you know, the military budget that keeps going up, and we never are like, well, how are we going to fund this?
Yeah.
But I mean, like, those things are important to reiterate over and over again so that people don't fall into the narrative trap. Because I think that's like a big theme that we're throwing on, is like, you can fall into these things when you don't apply the critical thinking, even to left-leaning publications, which I would say the Atlantic is not left-leaning, but I'm sure there would be other people who would make the opposite argument.
Sometimes they trip and fall leftward.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good.
They don't lean that direction all the time.
Yeah, but we got to critically think through these articles. You can't take it at face value. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't have the time to do research, but fact checking, even well-established publications, is so important.
On your point, Erin, like, I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, Bernie and Warren, who literally ran on I have plans, right? And now Zohran,
Yeah.
like, they know that they are going to get this criticism because it is the most expected thing ever. They know that they are going to be challenged on how you pay for it, how can you pay for it? And so they come ready. They come ready to go in really good, succinct media clips to say, this is how we're going to do it. What it usually is raising taxes on the wealthy. And for some reason, that doesn't seem to stick in people's mind as like a feasible thing that can be done. It can absolutely be done.
And it's wildly popular.
Yeah. But nobody really wants to talk about that, because the people who are pushing back are like, oh, wait a minute, I don't want to go that far. That's crazy. And yeah, the pundits just continue to say over and over again, yeah, anyway, it's impossible, just blatantly ignoring all of this. So Zohran Mandami went on CNN with Caitlin Collins, this is like a couple weeks ago now, and she was talking to him about how the New York Times editorial board wasn't going to endorse anybody in the primary, and they said, you know, Zohran's really fresh and he's really generating up a lot of energy and excitement, but, you know, and then went on to say that his plans are basically impractical. So she said, do you have a response to that? And he really succinctly, really well explained how he's going to pay for all of his plans and how he's going to get it done. And that clip kind of went viral. And I found that amazing. I was like, the fact that his explanation went viral, I thought was really unique in that way. And maybe it's just that suddenly now people are willing to listen or something. I don't know. But I mean, they're trying really hard to tear him down, and he just has not let up. And that's what you need to do to get through this. Like, there are going to be people at the top and people in the middle who want things to stay exactly as they are. They will constantly say it can never be done because that is in their best interest.
There's a couple things going on here that I think are in our favor as leftists, is that this type of framing is ubiquitous in the media. Like, how are you going to pay for it? It's impractical. And that forces people who do want to do this to find better ways to explain, find better ideas. Whereas the other side, they never have to explain anything. They don't really have to think anything through, so they're weaker. They don't have arguments. They don't really have a plan.
No.
They don't have good ideas. Like, what was Cuomo running on? Does anybody know?
I have no
Does
idea.
anybody know what Cuomo's plans
Could
were?
No
not
clue.
tell you.
Other than
Wasn't
more
affordability, I'll
power.
tell you that.
Yeah, it wasn't affordability. So he was a weak candidate just for a lot of reasons, but he's a weak candidate in the sense that he didn't actually have any plans. And none of these people actually have any plans to make things better. That makes a candidate like Zohran stand out. He does have ideas. He has thought it through. He's got a whole team of people who have plans and who have ideas about how to make this practical. There's also the other aspect of it's not practical. You know, it's not practical doing the shit that we're doing, especially in like New York City. Having a city where no one that isn't rich can live there isn't practical. Like, that's the most impractical thing you could possibly do. Continuing on this path where we end up with, I don't know, 10 trillionaires who decide everything, not very practical. So the real practical ideas are things that will make things better for the most people. And the only side coming with that idea are people on the left. And we need more Zohrans. And he's a unique character. We kind of talked about this before the show. He's very good at communicating. He's very charismatic. There aren't a lot of those guys. However, there are a lot of people who have great ideas. There are a lot of people who have thought this stuff out for a long time and have 70-page plans on how to implement it. So if we start pushing those people forward and start pushing the Cuomos to the side who just want to be in office and to do whatever the billionaires say, probably don't have your best interest at heart, maybe we can actually move forward in a really positive way and start to make things better. The pushback is going to be extreme. Like, that's another part of this. If Zohran gets in office and actually starts to make some changes, there's going to be an enormous pushback, and we have to be ready for that too. But the way forward is what he's saying and not what Cuomo is not saying.
Yeah, on that note, just before we recorded, we were talking about Zohran's victory, and I was saying that many months ago when I first started hearing about him, I thought, wow, he seems really great, but he's never going to win. Like, I had that defeatist mentality, and I have that defeatist mentality because I, live in this world and have experienced the same things that everyone else has.
Yeah.
And so I was mad at myself for not feeling like it was possible, but that is a reflection of the fact that the messages and the tactics from the rich and the moderates have worked, right? They have like kind of beaten us down to be like, well, we're never going to get that, even though it should be possible. It should totally be attainable. And so they say in this article that one of the biggest problems with Annie Lowrey writing this piece in The Atlantic is that people are reading it, that people are getting that message and then do have that self-defeatist feeling of, well, I guess it's never going to be possible. I guess it's unrealistic. It's important that we push back against this bullshit because it creates an environment of, well, this is never going to happen. I hope with Zohran's victory that there is some cracks in that now.
Yeah, that's exactly right, with the tiniest quibble that you said it creates the environment. And my next comment was going to be that we are perpetuating an environment that we have been stuck with for decades. Like, this isn't new, this defeatist, that's not reasonable or anything. And I know we all know that. I'm only teasing about word usage, but that's the point, is that we all have this idea because we've all lived in this world for however long. And basically anyone who's engaged in politics now, our entire lives of engagement has been during a period where it's impractical to imagine that literally anything valuable can get done. And so we are way overdue for the next era of progress. And unfortunately, like, that's the exact sentiment that helped propel Trump to victory, because he's full of shit, but he said he was going to do a bunch of stuff. And that's all a lot of people know, is I want a bunch of stuff to get done. And so he said he was going to do a bunch of stuff. And the Democrats were like, things are pretty good. And I mean, we've had that problem since Hillary Clinton said, something basically to that effect. So this article that we're talking about wraps up this way. It's like, on the topic of political feasibility, reframing our understanding of what's politically feasible. Like, we should by now be figuring out that it's actually malleable. What's feasible, what's politically possible, what people can be convinced is possible is way more malleable than we have been led to believe for decades. So it says, quote, if the history of social movements tells us anything, it's that the limits of the politically possible are hard to determine in advance, because many things that looked like they could not be done, the election of a black president, nationwide same-sex marriage, Medicare, the end of slavery, the enfranchisement of women, free public schools, were nevertheless accomplished through the diligent efforts of hardworking activists who defied the skepticism of useless pundits. End quote. And like, we just need to be reminded that things actually can and do happen, and our perception of what is possible is artificially constrained by people who are, effectively profiting off of their naysayerism. So, who are we up against exactly? That question brings us to our next article titled, The Gobs of Money and Lack of Vision at the Heart of Centrism. So in these times, sent a writer to a conference of centrist Democrats with millions and millions and millions of dollars from billionaires and those sorts of interests who want to be perceived as not fascist, but, attached to a political movement that's dedicated to not challenging them in any way. And this very critical writer went to this conference and had some thoughts about it. They say, quote, unlike most political philosophies, centrism defines itself in relation to other political philosophies. The right stands for something, and the left stands for something, but the centrists stand for in between those two things. This fact alone accounts for the centrists' messaging problems and their solution. The problem is, how do you get people to support a philosophy that doesn't inherently stand for anything? Their solution is attack the other political philosophies as too extreme, leaving centrism by process of elimination. And because this is a contest for control of the Democratic Party, that means in practice, attack the left. And then describing the sort of tone of this conference, they say, quote, it became clear that the centrists have two primary messages, which contradict one another. The first message is, we just need to do the common sense things that regular folks want. The second message is, here are a bunch of highly paid Harvard-educated consultants to discuss what that is, statistically, end quote. And those are the people convincing people like Annie Lowry at The Atlantic, like what's feasible and not feasible. There's a bunch of statisticians looking at past polling data and trying to concoct a political philosophy based on what people said they liked before. The inherent contradiction is, as this article goes on to explain, is like the reason the Democratic Party is so profoundly unpopular today is that people do not know what it stands for. There is simply no way to change this by saying, we will ask you all what you liked yesterday and do that tomorrow. In their pursuit of statistically bulletproof popularism, the centrists have their heads so deep in data that it's impossible for them to have a vision. And that lack of vision is the very thing that turns off the public. This is a political problem that is unsolvable by polling. It requires actual beliefs, end quote, which centrists absolutely do not have. Their values or their actual beliefs are, we should get elected.
Yep.
Like, that's it. We should do what it takes to get elected and then be good at that. And as Mamdani is showing, it's like, oh, people actually respond when there's like a human element. There's, ideas in the works. There are plans, but also like good communicators who can say that they truly believe in things. I mean, this is why there were so many Bernie to Trump voters. They're like, look, all I want is to vote for someone who I believe believes in something. Those two dudes, like, they say they believe in stuff and they say they believe in making change. I want change, and I want someone who actually believes in it. And if you regurgitate polling information to people, they can smell it a mile away and tune you out. So like, the centrists have no chance. They never have a chance. They don't even understand what their problem is, but they are profoundly in the way of progress. And the nature of being in the way of progress in our era is helping to prop up fascism by accident. Like that's what they're
Yeah.
doing. They're not in favor of Trump and all of that, but by standing in the way of people with actual vision, they are allowing Trump's vision to succeed.
And what was very disturbing about this article was how much people were celebrating Joe Manchin at this meeting. And I thought this was a really good point to make. They were saying how the way that these Democrats are talking about Joe Manchin is like, don't you see, if we could have squeezed in a Joe Manchin in some of these red districts, then we'd have more Democrats. And okay, at the top level, you can say, sure, like maybe you would have controlled the Senate or the House, which would make a big difference. But Joe Manchin voted against the infrastructure bill. He voted against the biggest piece of legislation out of the Biden administration and held it hostage for a long time. And then in the end, watered it down, and they had to remove the social program investments to make Joe Manchin like it enough. That is not progress.
And then the Democrats got wiped out.
Right. And then we got wiped out. So, like, no is the answer there. Yeah, it is not just a matter of someone with a D in front of their name. It matters if those people actually are going to follow through on just the platform of the party. Not even like, I mean, that should have been a slam dunk, super easy thing for Democrats to unify on. And Joe Manchin, the most conservative, quote unquote, Democrat in the whole party, like totally threw a wrench in everything. And like, that's just one example. There are others. And I am so tired of this narrative that like just keep making them more moderate and more moderate so we can quote win in red places. No, that's not going to work. That's not going to work long term. It seems extremely short-sighted to me. And it also makes voters angry because they can't trust these people to align in any which way, especially not for their personal needs. I mean, this article really pissed me off. I mean, I used to live like 2 blocks from where they had this meeting, and so I could picture like where they were and Franklin Park outside and everything. And I was just like, oh, I wish I lived there so I could go protest this meeting. Like, it's just so absurd.
This takes me back to 2008 with Barack Obama. He won overwhelmingly in 2008. And why he won is because of the hopefulness, the hope and change. People are craving change. And as we've learned over the last few years, this still is a profoundly racist country. But what overwrote that was the sense that things could get better. Now, there are, like you said, Jay, there were Bernie to Trump voters. There were Obama to Trump voters, too.
Mhm.
Like, that's a phenomenon that happened.
Yep.
So when you pit their fundamental racism with the desire that my life should be better against each other, a lot of times the idea that my life should be better will win out. And if we could keep doing that over and over again, maybe over time, that's just the way it would be. What happened, though, with Obama specifically is he sold the hope and change, and then he did the consultant market tested bullshit that the Democratic Party is known to do. The Democratic Party fundamentally is centrist. Like, there are outliers within it, but for the most part, what we're talking about here is the party leadership. That's what we're dealing with. We have to accept that on the left, we're fighting a 2-front war, and part of that war is with the Democratic Party. Now, the idea of the Democratic Party is that we're trying to get them to come our way and not destroy them, because this is a 2-party system. Third parties, I don't think that's a path forward in any short-term future, maybe very long-term. But the way the structure is set up right now is 2 parties. So we need to turn the Democratic Party into a party that does actually work for people, which is a thing that it used to do before the Civil Rights Movement. We are still fighting that. But Zohran is like a synthesis of the Elizabeth Warren, I got plans, and the Obama hope and change.
Mhm.
And if we can synthesize those 2 things and use that as the blueprint going forward, we can do better. Because what centrism, I guess, fundamentally is the status quo is good. And nobody thinks the status quo is really good except for rich people, very rich people. They think the status quo is good. That's why this conference has so many financial backers, because they're benefiting from things the way they are. They don't want things to change. That's what they're actually saying, is things are good the way they are. But the vast majority of people on the left, people on the right, people just going to work know that it's not great right now, and know that we do need change. We disagree wildly about how it should change, but I think we all agree that it needs to. And that's Trump in this last election against Harris was the change candidate. Somehow, some
Somehow.
way,
Somehow.
beyond all logic, he was the change candidate.
Yeah.
And that is a failure of the Democratic Party.
Yes.
But there was that moment, and we had it on this podcast, where we felt hopeful with the Kamala Harris campaign,
Remember
because
that? Mhm.
there was a moment where she was the change candidate,
Mhm.
and she would have won if she had stuck with that.
Yep.
I mean, we're pretty bleak, and I think some of us were drinking the Kool-Aid early, so yeah. I think I have solved something listening to everybody talk. So offline, we were discussing the problem with some of the protests, which is like the action thereafter and what to do with the energy. And as Deon and Jay were both talking, I just kind of like got overwhelmed by the system that's working against progressive candidates, like the amount of money that's going towards the centrists. I mean, you have this stupid book that is literally retouting like neoliberalism, which I will say Best of Left was
Yeah.
early on that framing.
We're talking about abundance, to be clear.
Abundance, yes. So like that overwhelmingness of like he has no choice but to do everything that he promised. Not everything, but to take action for people to start feeling the results, because there is going to be a microscope. He is no Elon Musk. He's not going to get the grace that Elon Musk got. So we have to see the action behind it. But anyways, connecting the protest, I think it needs to be primaries. Like we need to energize primary elections that are coming up, get the candidates out there, start framing that as pushing for change. And then you have people who are hungry to do something. Because, I mean, attending these protests, by and large, the people I'm having conversations with, it's like, okay, that's great. Like, it was so nice to see everyone out there. But what now? Like, I want to do something. And I think like you have canvassers right there. You have people who literally want to knock on their neighbors' doors, start getting messaging out, like start taking action. And like in talking about these primaries and things like that, I think that's our best grassroots way forward, and the way that we truly affect change and make sure that the hope candidate is actually the one that runs in the general election.
The Zohran campaign reportedly knocked on 1 million
Yeah.
doors in a city with 8
Yeah.
million people.
Yep.
So that's
Huge.
very real.
Right.
Numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah, numbers.
Absolutely.
We have numbers, they have money, and we've got to get the numbers out.
I mean, on this note, what Erin was saying about like those are your canvassers right there, that has really been crystallizing for me, this disconnect between the movement and the Democratic Party. Like they should want to plug in. They should be at these events handing out, like ways to get involved, like whatever. The fact that there is no real connection, that they are holding the movement and the protests at arm's length for the most part. There are some who show up, but as we were saying before we got on this call, they're the usual suspects. Nobody's surprising, right? They hold everything at arm's length because they're afraid of being tainted, and they're like scared because they don't know what the perception, like broad public perception, is going to be of this movement, and they can't control it. And if we learn anything from this article about this consultant meeting in DC with Democrats, they desperately want to control everything. They would like to control it down to like the tiniest little detail, and they can't. And that is what is messing them up and tripping them up constantly. Like they're just control freaks who don't know how to do it. Like, well, if we just get the data and we just follow that to the letter, everything will be fine. It's like, yeah, that data's come and gone. You're not like feeling what is happening here. You're not reading the room. My favorite expression. So that is a big problem, because if they don't connect with those people, then we are just going to keep repeating the same patterns. Zohran, AOC, like Bernie, all these people know how to engage voters. Obama knew how to engage voters, for God's sakes, to get them to want to say, like, please let me work for your campaign. Please let me volunteer for your campaign. Why is that so hard? And like, what can we do to make sure that that strategy is more widespread? I mean, I don't have the answer right now because I'm so disappointed in the Democratic Party. I don't know what the levers are here, but I don't know. Maybe the Zohran thing will really rock the boat in some way.
The one major takeaway we should actually take from Trump is that making enemies riles up your supporters. Like, it is so deep in our human DNA that that is what gets us going, and he has used that. Like, that is his instrument of choice, and he's played it well, you know. But I wanted to finish up this article that wraps up a lot of what's being said, including the influence of money, and it just entirely sums up our state of politics. It says, quote, "The right wants to change the existing power structure to give more power to its chosen groups. The left wants to change the existing power structure to give more power to everyone, including the marginalized who are by definition unpopular. The centrists, in the most generous reading, their project asks, how much good can we do without changing the existing power structure at all?
Yeah.
Turns out the answer is not much, but there's plenty of money to be had in pretending to try." End quote.
Mhm.
That's it. That's the whole game. Trump's right wants to re-engineer the power structure. The progressive left wants to re-engineer the power structure. Those in the power structure and, you know, profiting from it, and, you know, and the centrists taking money from the wealthy who are enjoying the current power structure, they're just trying to soothe their own sense of morality without ruffling any feathers or losing any money for themselves or their financiers. That's it. And so my only takeaway is it's time to make enemies. Like, figure it out. You have to recognize that tinkering within the current power structure without upsetting it has brought us to the brink of fascism. If there's ever been a wake-up call, that's it. It is time to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. Like, we have to make enemies. There is no path to changing the direction we're going without making enemies.
Then those enemies, like what we're talking about specifically, what we're saying are who are our enemies is 100,000, a couple 100,000 people, whereas Trump is saying, I don't know, the majority of humanity. So
Right.
even what we're talking about isn't exactly the same. Our enemies are a few people who are fucking things up for the rest of humanity, whereas Trump just doesn't like people.
Yeah.
Elon Musk doesn't like people. The Project 2025 likes straight white men in America who have money, who are Christian. That's it. Everyone else is an enemy. So it's even easier for us to use this framing because it's very targeted. It's the same bullshit the military uses that actually is easy to accept if we use targeted strikes against select enemies and if we use the special forces to go hack the power structure. Well, we actually want to do that. We don't want to hurt people. We want most people on our side.
And on that point, I think, we've been talking about Elon, his self-driving cars and all this business, but like what is under the surface there? I'll give Jason Pargin, the author who's big on TikTok and everywhere. He did a really good video about why he likes the movie There Will Be Blood. And it's because the main character is a type of person you don't see kind of portrayed very often. And it's a type of person who wants all the benefits of people, but wants nothing to do with people because he actually hates people. And our society is leaning now in a way where the billionaires and the oligarchs and the people in charge are really making a very smooth path towards a future where we don't engage with each other at all. Like, we talk a lot about how we need more community and connection and we need more trains, as Deon always says, and I agree, because we need to bump into each other more, right? And what is happening is self-driving cars, you don't have to deal with a taxi driver. You don't have to talk to anybody. You can just get where you want to go in a car on a road. AI relationships, you don't need a person. You don't need a complicated person. You can just have a relationship on your own, not interact with anyone else. Amazon's delivery, the way they do their deliveries, like all of that is so that you never have to step outside and interact with a human. And so as we talk about who our enemies are, let's also talk about how they are trying to divide us and keep us away from each other, because that is going to break society. It is breaking society. We are already living with some of the results. And that should also be a message for, like, screw them. We don't want them in charge. We don't want them to dictate how we live our lives. We don't want them to separate us further and make us more lonely and more isolated. They are changing our way of life. It's not just they built a company and got rich and had a really good, tax situation. They are also trying to destroy the very fabric of our communities.
Amanda, are you advocating for us to prioritize people in these decisions
I
over
am, Erin.
profit?
I am.
So the real
Yeah.
slippery slope. But I mean, I think you're right, because when those systems come into place, the people who are using them will say, whew, what a huge benefit
Mhm,
this is adding
mhm.
to my life. But really, what they're reacting to is the fact that the social life has been degraded so much that it is hard to interact with other people, because other people are living in shitty conditions just
Mhm.
like we are. So, like, it doesn't create these feel good moments when you bump up against one another because you're all frustrated at the same lack of infrastructure that, the other person is. So I think we do need to start asking the question about how it benefits people, instead of looking at the way that, like, we're reacting to the shitty world that we're living in, instead of contributing to make it better and center, like, human connection, which, shocker, is like one of the fundamental things of human life, is the connection with one
Yeah,
another. As feel good as that seems, like, that is
it's
true. It's
true.
biologically
It's
true.
true.
Yeah. Science don't care about your feelings.
So as you two were talking, I just kind of realized why centrists think that they can do a lot of good without making any enemies, without upending any power systems. And it is this long running philosophy that business interests are actually in line with human interests. The
Mhm.
whole idea of like what's good for GM is good for the country, what's good for Ford is good for the country. And then that continues into like, well, what's good for the country must be good for me, I guess,
Mhm.
probably. Like they never really made the connection other than those specific companies will hire individual people. Will that translate to bigger structural societal benefits? Let's not ask those questions in too much detail. But the reality is that that is not the case. And when you start talking about focusing on human needs, you are inevitably going to make enemies with corporations and rich people who benefit from those corporations. And that's what the centrists think they don't have to do. No, no, no. Like, but we can have corporations be good and then also do good. And like, can't we just do that all? And it's actually like weirdly Pollyanna-ish. It is as out there and irrational as they think the left is
Mhm.
about their policy goals. Oh, that's unreasonable. It's, you're pie in the sky. I'm like, no, dude, you're the one who thinks that diametrically opposing interests can be aligned.
Mhm.
They can't. Stop trying with the square peg and the circular hole. Like, just stop that foolish endeavor. So now that we're all excited about doing things for people and recognizing that enemies have to be made, you might be wondering, like, well, what's an example of something we could do? You're in good luck. I have news for you. Our next article is Red Tape Isn't the Only Reason America Can't Build. And this is from, shocker, The Atlantic, because The
Yeah,
Atlantic's
notice that.
tagline, we're not always the worst. See, the thing about The Atlantic, here's the thing about The Atlantic. They are so gigantic. Like, they are one of the most successful magazines in the country at the moment. They have so many writers that they actually can have some pretty good writers show up right next to the worst dregs of writers in the country. And that is just the case. And they put out so many articles. Like, it's amazing how many people they have pumping out content for them. So anyway, so the Atlantic is talking about America not being able to build stuff. This is sort of in reference to the abundance discussion, which is like, well, it's just red tape that's the problem. And that is not the only problem. So here's what it says, quote, when it comes to broadband, procedural simplicity on its own hasn't worked in the past and won't work in the future. The deeper issue is that the United States government has abandoned the full range of policy tools that would actually get the job done, end quote. And the piece goes on into like a fair amount of detail about the federal broadband expansion programs. There have been multiple tried, and they have all come up lacking. Trump tried a more like laissez-faire approach in his first term that failed. Biden came along and tried a new program with lots of regulation that has also been very slow to implement. Trump came back in and kneecapped that program. So like it's a total mess. But what is similar between the two is that they both focused on subsidizing private companies to do the work that would otherwise be unprofitable for them. So it is unprofitable to lay the wires to get to every rural community and property in the country. They're not going to make their money back on the investment costs. And so the government says, we will help front those costs so that you do the work to connect those people out in the country, and then they will be your customers and you can make money off of them going forward. It wouldn't be profitable if we didn't subsidize you, but then everyone gets connected and that's good for the country. Continuing the article, it says, quote, this is what happens when government loses the ability or the will to undertake more direct interventions in the market and to challenge, not merely subsidize corporations. A century ago, America faced a problem almost identical to the broadband shortage, rural electrification, end quote. And if you'd like a breakdown of what FDR thought about the process of rural electrification, check out our Solved episode 5, Keep Your Birch Rod Handy, which refers to the metaphor of a birch rod being used as a threat to private companies if they didn't serve the public well. The government would then come in and metaphorically beat them with a stick of competition. So the article explains what the government did then that feels like inconceivable to us now. And so it says New Deal policies supported 3 alternate strategies. Number 1, creating local cooperatively owned utilities that would compete directly with any private corporations. Number 2, federally owned public options, so that if the local community can't pull it together, then the federal government will just step in, will own the utility, and compete with any private businesses. And then the subsidy sort of flows naturally because it's just federally owned. We don't have to make a profit on it. We just need it to work well and so forth. And then the third option is that private providers were classified as utilities and therefore subject to strict regulation that insisted that they provide connection to unprofitable properties surrounding their primary territory. So an electric company would come in, they could set up the grid in a densely packed area and make a ton of money from it. But the government said, look, you're a utility, you have to serve everyone in your area, which meant if you want to make a lot of money from that densely packed area, you're also going to have to build out your grid to cover the rural areas surrounding you. And those 3 strategies combined got the job done. And we can do the same with broadband internet. We just have sort of handcuffed ourselves now. We say, like, we don't know what to do other than subsidize. Can we just shovel money at private companies and try to have some like regulation, a few bells and whistles, a few incentives here and there, and then will you do it? And like, no, turns out it's always a mess, whichever path you take, the hands-off path or the regulatory path, it's just not getting the job done. And we need to recognize that, yeah, look, if we need to make some enemies, if we need those broadband companies to hate the government and be angry that we're competing with them directly, whatever, dude, we have shit to do. We need to get this solved, and the current strategy is not working.
I thought this article was very reasonable. I had one little quibble. I think the writer was trying to take us on a journey saying, the BEAD program, Biden's internet program. It does sound a little overly complicated. Here are, some of the things that have to happen. And I read that list and I was like, that's not complicated. Those are like the steps that need to happen to roll out a rural infrastructure or internet project. And I was kind of surprised. And, then the next paragraph was taking us on a different journey. But I'm all for efficiency. I'm all for streamlining. But this is a huge country. And there are a lot of people. And to do something well and to make sure it doesn't immediately break or the process itself breaks down, you're going to have to do some work. And it might take time. Like they were talking about mapping and how important that ended up being, like making these maps of where all the rural communities and places were that needed internet. And they found out very quickly how important that was when the Trump administration tried to like really streamline their rural internet project and ended up, I mean, I don't know if the sales went through, but they had companies bidding on already occupied land. There was like already infrastructure on some of this land. There were city infrastructure or like commercial properties on this land because they didn't do the work of making sure that they were giving land that was actually usable to these ISP companies. And so I'm sure there are ways we can streamline it. I'll say that. I'm sure there are ways we can streamline it. I love the actual proposal that was the point of this article. But I do think when we say red tape, we need to be specific because I think red tape at one point meant unnecessary stuff, right? And we are leaning to a point now where the red tape is actually like necessary stuff. And so, how do we make sure we don't just blanket everything as red tape because it's going to take a while because it's necessary and actually will make this last for a long time or go really well when it rolls out? So, that's just my one little quibble I had to get in there.
When most people in this context are using red tape, they're just talking about regulations, as if regulations in and of themselves are bad and
Right.
are holding us back. If you remove regulations on a power company, they're going to pollute your water. The only thing they will streamline is how much money they can take from you and give to the shareholders. That's what gets streamlined every single time. And having listened to Ezra Klein for a long time and read a lot of what he's written over the last decade and a half or so, I almost find it impossible to believe that he doesn't understand that. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe this book, like, treat it with good faith, and maybe he does think this is the way forward. But I think it's ridiculous because companies with a profit motive don't care about doing things for people. That is not their goal. Their goal is to make money, no matter what the company is. So when there's a profit motive behind it, they're going to try to make profit as efficiently as possible. That's the only thing that gets streamlined when you remove these regulations. So that's why you have to regulate these companies with a profit motive and limit how much profit they can take, make sure that they have to serve as much of the community as possible. All these things have to be done in this profit system, or you could just turn them into public goods. Like, you could just turn these private companies into public companies. That's an option. I know it's almost foreboding in this country to talk about having nationalized industries, but there are some things where a profit motive doesn't make sense for people. And as we've been talking about this whole time, what are we doing any of this for? What is this society actually for if it's not for people?
Yeah.
Market cap.
And that's what.
Oh.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's a joke, but that's what it's for right now.
Mhm.
And that's why we need to be honest about who's our enemies in this fight for making things better for people. Because there are people who don't care about other people. They only care about line go up. They
Mhm.
only care about how many zeros are in the bank account. People who have more money than anyone else in human history are still worried about making more money because there's no cap. There's no point where they will be happy, where they will be satisfied. The current status quo in this country that centrists are trying to preserve is literally the destruction of humanity. That's the status quo that we're on. If we stay on this path unchanged, humanity will not survive. it's easy to get into the, the doomerism of it all. But I think that's just true. So when Amanda was talking about not having the feeling that Zohran couldn't possibly win, that's a totally normal feeling. And I think it's connected to this feeling that things keep going in this terrible negative direction. And I think we need to harness the fact that that is a reality. We are going in that negative direction, and use that feeling, that impending sense of doom, to say that if we do not change, if we do not do these things that we say we should because we want to do the best for humanity, that people on the left are saying, we won't survive. So we have to do these things. Not that it may not work. No, we have to. We have no choice. So that's the abundance agenda that I think we should fight for. The abundance for humanity. And fuck Elon Musk.
Yeah.
If that could be the centerpiece of it,
Right.
like he could represent all of these people, because they all have the same drive, different degrees of it. And maybe some of them are good people, but they're still the enemy.
People don't have to be bad to be wrong.
Yeah.
That's the thing, like so many of these people, they think line goes up for money is linked to line goes up for people. More money means good for people. And they just like believed that story. And it's not true. That's the countervailing argument we're trying to make. You reminded me of a classic cartoon that I love. The image is of a dude in a tattered suit sitting in a cave next to a fire talking to the kids. And he just says, yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, we created a lot of value for shareholders.
Yes, that's also my favorite.
Exactly.
That's a viral sensation.
I think that's why, I'm not giving good faith to Ezra Klein, because he has the money, the power, and the education to know better. And if he doesn't, I do think it's now willful. I do think when I first heard abundance removed from all context, I did think we were going to be, hey, we're living in a time of abundance. We need to stop acting like we're in scarcity. That is what I thought the book was going to be. So I'm not really interested, because Ezra Klein is kind of having this conversation as if he doesn't directly influence the conversations that are happening around it. As if he doesn't have a platform to use to frame these arguments and to change public opinion. He could write a book where he's like, no, let's center people. But that's not what he chose to do. And he is too intelligent
Very
not to know
wonky,
better.
though.
That is my
Very wonky.
opinion.
I have a theory about that, but I'm going to save it for members only. And so maybe we'll have a little discussion after the show about that. To wrap up, I think it's pretty clear, right? I mean, we're going to solve our problems by making the right enemies and recognizing that that's necessary.
Yeah, and not the right, the correct enemies.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Always love wrapping it up neatly like that. If you have any thoughts or questions, you can send us a message at 202-999-3991. Send an email to j@bestofleft.com. Connect on Signal at bestofleft.01. Thanks for listening, and remember that this is all really happening. So be decent, act like what you say and do matters, and do what matters most. We have to make enemies. There is no path to changing the direction we're going without making enemies.
They talk of unity and finding middle ground, while fossil fuel lobbyists run this town. Pharmaceutical giants write the bills, and centrists swallow corporate pills. Nothing changes when you play it safe, bowing down to the donor base. Real change means you'll piss them off. The billionaire class won't just back off. Make some enemies, take a stand against the corporate stranglehold on this land. They got the money, so we need leaders ready to fight. Make some enemies to do what's right. Big Pharma's rage means Make some enemies, take a stand against the corporate stranglehold on this land. They've got the money, they've got the might, but we need leaders willing to fight. Make some enemies for what is right. Every right we've ever won made some rich man come undone. Boardroom anger, donor threats, that's the sound of real progress. Make some enemies, take the heat. Wall Street's fury tastes so sweet. Stand with us or stand aside. There's no neutral on this ride. Make enemies and say it proud. Say their names out fucking loud.